So diversification is one of the biggest things that you can, or the most powerful things you can do for your portfolio. So asset allocation, how you have your assets aligned in your portfolio is probably the biggest thing you can do for your portfolio. So think of it like a football team. So a football team is made up of defenders, attackers, and strikers. Similar to your portfolio, your portfolio can be made up of defensive assets or attacking assets. So think of so defence is like having a goalkeeper. So your goalkeeper is like protection. So your insurance. So if you've got debt, so say for instance a mortgage on a house. If you die, that debt doesn't die with you. So if you have insurance to cover that, if you're living in a family house, that means that if you die, for instance, and that will get paid for you straight away for your family house. If you've got any dependents, if you've got children or elderly parents, by having insurance, that will cover you for if you're the main breadwinner, that will cover you for any if anything happens to you. And if you have desire for life insurance as well. Some clients have had nurses or doctors. They quite often see lots of kind of illness and or death, and these types of people tend to want to have more insurance. So that's insurance. That's number one. That's like your goalkeeper. So the defence. So number three. Cash is your defender, your centre back. So if you've covered step 2, you have an emergency fund already, so that's already done for you. But have 3 months of expenses covered for you and that gives you peace of mind for anything happening to you. So that's your central defender. Your centre back, your other centre back is property. So that's having that as a centre defender, that's a very defensive kind of asset in your portfolio. So the other 2 defenders are, think of debt. So if you've got credit card debt, or if you've got any other bad debt, you want to substitute that debt off your team and bring on lending. So you're lending to companies or corporations. So lending, and you want to diversify around assets and within assets. So you want to lend money to lots of different companies. So if one company goes bust, you're not going to be liable for that one company. But if you have 50 companies, essentially that reduces your risk. So that's your left back. That's what they call bonds. You're lending to companies or corporations. So the final defender is the right back. So right back is defensive shares. These are like utilities, so things that are going to still do well in recession. So think of water companies or medicine. That people are still going to need this when in a recession. People are still going to go and buy their children cough medicine or things like that. So these do well in all year round. And the reason why they do so well is because they produce dividends. So dividends are they're given profits to the. So when a company does well, they produce profits, and those profits can get passed to the shareholder. So that's just to summarise. That's your defence. So your goalkeeper, your centre back, which is cash and property. Your left back is a bond. You're lending to companies or corporations, and then your right back is what I call the golden geese. So these are your defensive shares, and these lay eggs like your golden goose, like a dividend, and they produce dividends in both good times and bad times, like recessions. So moving on to the midfield. So think of the midfield, your 2 centre midfielders. So a pension. So pension is a dark horse. So the quickest way to get thrown out of a house party is start talking about pensions, because they seem to be quite dull. But there's new changes in the law in 2015, which is called pension freedom, which is blown open what you can do with a pension. So now these are really flexible, and these are the wonderful kind of assets that you can use because they're so tax efficient. We'll talk about this in another video. So that's a central midfielder. The other central midfielder is what I call the horses. These horses are value companies, or really they're utilising kind of things that people aren't necessarily valued in the market. So if you look at kind of performance, these are kind of really utilising the expertise of active managers or knowing experts, building on their expertise. These horses tend to, they gallop and they can jump, what I call, so they can move really quickly and they can kind of jump in the market. So these are what I would call now, like a Facebook, for instance. They're producing lots of profit, or even like a Netflix. They started off with small companies, but now these are companies that are generating lots of profits and doing really quite well. To have that in your portfolio is important to really kind of improve the kind of performance of the portfolio. So moving to the wingers now, so the left winger think of commodities. So you go to a shop and the basket that you have, it's a basket of goods. So think of things like wheat, so your Weetabix in the morning that you eat, or milk, or so it's even things like metal that are in the camera that's filming me now, or in the iPhone. So these are metals, but these are called commodities. So these are like a basket of goods. I used to trade gas, and gas is very volatile. It moves up and down, similar to like the left winger moving up and down the pitch, these commodities can move up and down very quickly. But you can utilise this volatility and make it work for you as part of an overall broad portfolio. So that's the left winger. So we move to the right winger. It's what I call the tracker. So the tracker is tracking the market up and down. So similar to a player running up and down the pitch. So these are like what people use, like tracker funds. So you can use, people call them ETFs, or exchange traded funds. So these are really good to have in your portfolio because it literally tracks the market. So there are upsides and downsides to every player. So the tracker is very logical, so it moves with the market, but then it doesn't necessarily have the emotional intelligence like a horse that can maybe predict what's going to, or maybe have a better view of the market that these other players can do. So coming back to the tracker, what you want to look for, you want to look for size of the company. So smaller companies tend to move much quicker than kind of older or kind of bigger companies, just because it's like mass times acceleration equals force. So the kind of smaller companies grow much quicker. So you want to look for size, you want to look for value, how good their fundamentals are, and we'll talk about the fundamentals more in another video. So essentially how much earnings they're making, and then we could talk about momentum as well. So momentum, which way of the market. So the old adage of let the trend be your friend. So you're following the momentum of the market, and that's a way to kind of utilise the trackers. That's the right winger. But with the strength, they also have weaknesses. So the way the markets move, they tend to what they call move up the stairs and out the window. So tracker can move up the stairs. So if you look at any, the FTSE 100 tends to move up quite slowly, but then because of what they call loss aversion, where people, as soon as you see a market sell off, it moves down quite quickly. So trackers have that disadvantage that they move up relatively slowly, but they can fall quite quickly. So it's really just to reiterate that having a diverse portfolio. So now we get to the exciting ones. They're the two strikers. So you've got the growing companies and growing companies. So growing companies I call the fleas. So fleas comes from the investor called Jim Slater. So he says fleas jump. So these very small companies maybe seem annoying, or doesn't seem to be, if they're not producing the profits that they want, but these fleas can jump quite quickly. So think of if a human was the size of a flea, it can jump all over. It could jump the height of Tower Bridge. So these small companies. So think of what they call the FANGs. So Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. If 10, 20 years ago, these companies were very small, and look at them now. They're huge companies, and they've grown very quickly. So having growing companies in your portfolio really can help grow that portfolio. But with the advantage of they move quickly, not all companies are successful. So coming back to Facebook, if you think of MySpace, that's not a profitable company anymore. So having a really reiterating that you have diversified around the assets and within that asset. So you want to have not just one company, you want to have 50 companies in a fund, so you really benefit from the companies that do really well. So that striker is the growing company, The second striker is growing countries. So think of the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So 10, 20 years ago, these companies did the growth in China, which is amazing, and these companies can grow really quickly. So these strikers are, the one's going to be, so scoring goals. So scoring goals is getting you money, whereas conceding goals, you're losing money. So getting goals is like putting money into your pocket. Conceding goal is like putting money out of your pocket. So a growing country, these can grow really quickly, and you can gain from having this in your portfolio, like your strikers. But with strikers, they move up quite quickly, but then they can fall down quite quickly. So if you look at Brazil, for instance, that's grown really quickly, but then also because of political turmoil and other aspects, they've kind of haven't performed as well as other emerging markets. So your growing countries, I call these the dragons or the tigers. So think of these as the dragons can fly, but they're also dangerous. They can blow fire on people. So these are great to have in your portfolio, but just to be aware, these are your strikers. They're not. It's all about having a diverse portfolio. So these are the 11 players that I would recommend in your portfolio. This is coming from Harry Malkovich, who won a Nobel Prize in 1990. His modern portfolio theory. This is the kind of gold standard of portfolios. But if that seems too much, start with 5. So 5, pick your 5 players in your portfolio. It really depends on your age. So if you're younger, you have more time to ride out those markets, the ups and downs of the market. You can take a much more aggressive portfolio because you have that time to. Whereas if you're in your 70s, for instance, you want to take a much more defensive strategy. You want to have, you want to have much more. You want to have much more a bond portfolio, like your left back, where you're lending to companies and corporations, or defensive shares. So it really depends on yourself, and that's why asset allocation is so important, because it really depends on your person. There's no right type for everyone, but it really does depend on your individual circumstances. This is what I call my football formation asset allocation, and it will be covered in more detail in my book.